Hello, very beautiful community. My Prime Minister Keir Starmer has resigned, and I'm going to give you an under 10-minute off-the-cuff reaction. The first thing to understand is that one of the most remarkable inventions by human beings is liberal democracy. And that means here we've got to respect the office of the Prime Minister and respect the peaceful transfer of power. So it's disgusting when the monster child in the White House basically fires Keir Starmer on social media the day before he resigns, as though he were on The Apprentice. But that's outside of the UK. In the UK context, it's not okay for the irresponsible post-truth populist Nigel Farage to communicate about what happened without referencing the importance of the office and the peaceful transition of power. It's also not okay for the ex-Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn to have a go at Keir Starmer without adding a line about respect for the office and respect for the transfer of power, celebration of the transfer of power. Having a go at Keir Starmer is fantastic. It's completely unproblematic, but you've got to add that line. And it's also not okay for the political entity, your party in the UK, to tweet good riddance to Starmer. Not because it's not okay to say good riddance given his policies, but because you need to balance good riddance given the policies if you don't like the policies, but you've got to add to that kind of sacred institutional respect. Now, a very small pedantic point on top of that is that Keir Starmer's resignation speech was drowned out by music from a pro-EU protester, and I am not pedantic normally. So if you invite me to your house and I come in and you're suspended off a chandelier yodeling, I'm going to just say, well, tell me how it feels doing that. What's it like? So I'm very open, but I get a bit pedantic in a couple of domains. One of them is the ritual that democracies depend on to keep going, right? It's not just about rules and laws. It's also about this kind of informal ritual that keeps citizens connected with the idea that there's something sacred about this enterprise, an increasingly difficult thing for us to do today. And so there was this music blaring, and I think it either should have been stopped, so you anticipate that it's going to happen and you move the person, or if you don't or can't do that, you acknowledge it in the speech. Hey, by the way, I'm being drowned out by a pro-EU protest. I'm leaving office, but I also know that the UK is involved in a very tense and complex conversation about its relationship with Europe. Next thing I would say is that what basically happened is that Labour MPs realised that something was wrong with Keir Starmer, even though they didn't know what it was. They basically felt, look, he can't win the next election, and if he stays, things are going to get worse. But we don't know exactly why. In fact, we're shocked by how clearly that is the case. But we don't fully understand it. We just know that it's the case. What is that to do with? It is partly to do with the following. Keir Starmer is, being neurodiverse, in my estimation, very natural at sitting at the table, looking at 2 or 3 reports, looking at 2 or 3 bits of analysis, and making the best and most ethically responsible decision on the day that he can possibly make. And so, Keir, what is your job? Well, my job is to keep waking up on Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays and keep making decisions that are good for the country. Keir Starmer is not a political entrepreneur. He is not somebody who lacks a sense of responsibility. He is somebody who can be awake at night beating the hell out of himself for things he feels he's got wrong. Too much so, indeed. But this kind of picture I've painted of what's natural for him leaves 2 things out that were missing. One is communication about what you're doing. And Keir's problem wasn't just that he didn't feel natural about it, but that he felt so not natural about it and so stuck in not feeling natural about it that he couldn't grasp the more constitutive point that in a crisis of trust you have to over-communicate with your population, with your citizenry, And that matters as much as any single policy does. And that was just not for Keir. Right? And a second consequence of this is that it's very hard if you're waking up every Tuesday and trying to piecemeal do the right thing for the country to say, this is my big national project. Right? I am taking the country in this direction. And if I can't do it, it's because lots of things are going to be in my way. But that is clearly where I want to go. Okay? Do I feel sorry for Keir Starmer? No. I think we spend too much time asking this question when it comes to people in positions of high power. The worst of this, by the way, is in football when people say, do you feel sorry for Ruben Amorim for being fired by Manchester United? No. He's 40. He's got a healthy family and a happy family. He's good looking. He is rich as hell. He is still one of the most successful young managers in the world, and he could coach Manchester United again in 20 years if he did well as a coach. So it's a preposterous question. And I tend to be almost in that position when it comes to intrinsic political failure. There is extrinsic political failure. That's to say that's failure of the job that you can't control, running into a health challenge, or being, locked up in an elevator for 2 years. If that happened to Keir Starmer and somebody put him in an elevator and fed him and watered him and oxygenated him and gave him a bed, but he was kept there, and that's the reason why he couldn't deliver for the country, then I'd feel very sorry for him. But Keir's failure is failure on the job. Now, it's a difficult job. We've had 7 prime ministers in 10 years. And what does that mean? That means that the country is ungovernable by its main political forces. Now, not ungovernable the way Russia is ungovernable, but it's a country that is ungovernable by the standards of a functioning liberal democracy. It's a country that's so hard to govern that either it's impossible to do a good job, or you've got to be nearly a political genius to do a good job. You've got to be an extraordinary political leader. So running the country with a minimal level of adequacy then becomes an extraordinary rather than the routine achievement for a prime minister. But it's still the job. It's still difficulty on the job. And then Keir's issues with communication are also part of the job. And Keir's issues with policy and with having big picture ideas is also part of the job. Now, what do we say about the next few months and the health of UK democracy? Well, 2 questions arise. Is there going to be a leadership election? And it looks like there won't be, and we know from Kamala replacing Joe Biden that that's not good for democracy. But if you can't have one, you can't have one. If you've got an insufficiency of compelling candidates who want to enter, well, that's reality. Then are we going to have a general election? And the problem here is that for legitimacy's sake, Andy Burnham needs a general election. And a bold and confident and successful Andy Burnham would have a general election. But he's also got a big majority. So it's going to be a difficult decision to make. But quite certainly having an election would be good for democracy. The argument against it would be, well, what's the point of having an election if Nigel Farage is going to win it? Well, the answer to that is actually not let's not have one, it's let's have one and still try to win it. Because you just cumulatively lose if you do defense rather than offense politics, if you do retreat politics. And Keir Starmer's government was retreat politics. And it was also technocratic politics. I'm going to run to 12 minutes now. Not 10, I apologize. Technocratic politics, because what I've just said about Keir Starmer very naturally aligns with technocratic government. And technocratic government is incompatible with a situation where you've got a crisis of trust and a radical polarization in the country. You've got to engage much more with people on the doorstep and gather what you have and what you don't have civic consent for. You can't lack civic consent for policies, but then still do them because it's the right thing to do according to the expertise you've consulted. What does Andy Burnham need to do? Quite a lot, but to start with, and I'm not optimistic here, I must say, but to start with, he needs to boldly tell the country where he wants to take it, almost by way of advancing a national project, and doing so in a way that melts down some of this corrosive incapacity we have in our culture to visualize the future. And when you can't visualize the future, it feels incredibly anxiety inducing. He's got to speak to that. At the same time, he's also got to talk about the country's ungovernability. And ungovernability is something you've got to be real about with citizens. You can't just say, I'm going to do all of this and it's going to be easy. You also have to say, look, these are the objective challenges we're facing, and these are the limitations of the vehicles we have available for us to enact change. Next thing you've got to do is do this early, and also relate it very explicitly to your first 2 or 3 policies on the foreign stage and domestically, so that these are both proof of concept for where you want the country to go, and they're evidence that you're making progress. And then you've got to link your position on the foreign stage with domestic policy, because questions like how you're going to balance the economy, how you're going to balance, gross inequality, are tied to questions of how you're going to balance the Russian threat, the Chinese threat, and the threat that Europe faces through its incredible interdependence with the United States. And to know how a politician can stand up to the United States, a European politician in our historical moment. If you haven't seen it already, you've got to check out this video I did a couple of weeks ago on the main channel. That's my quick off-the-cuff reaction. Lots of love, beautiful community. Thank you.